Moonshiners is back for a new episode tonight, and the fur is raised, and the fight is on as territories are breached, and feathers ruffled. Things get a bit testy in our exclusive clip ahead of the episode, and violence is hinted at, as Mike Cockrell scouts some multigrain mash and meets with a shiner who is selling outside of his designated area. It's a bit of a sting set up as the guy's face is pixelated, and Mike concocts a deal after tasting his multigrain. That ain't good, y'all. It breaks what Mike calls the moonshiner's code. In the clip below, we see the whole thing unfold. What in the world is all this? Asks Mike, surveying the jars of shine, knowing full well what's going on. When negotiating a price, Mike offers $40 after the mystery man asks $100, claiming it costs a fortune to make that little bit of distilled liquid in the jar. Sign up for our newsletter, get updates on the latest posts and more from monsters and critics straight to your inbox. By submitting your information, you agree to our T&CS and privacy policy. There's something fishy in the damned water going on. Mike tells Jerry Benson inside the truck. He adds, "I think I just found it, red flag, on the front porch of this here man's house." Jerry says, "How the hell is this inside of our territory?" Therein lies the trouble, as tonight we see how Mike and Jerry will resolve this shiner who is selling the hooch off his porch and breaking the hallowed shiner's code. In the cab, Mike Cockrell says, "Moonshiner's code. We will not sell inside of each other's territory." He adds, "I'm not accusing nobody or anything, but I know in my heart and gut when it's come from damn, well, I learned my lesson about making mistakes and stuff, but I still carry a lighter in my pocket." Sevier County Moonshiners Mike and Jerry have their own label, called Tennis-Sipping Moonshine, and fans often find them filming in the hood. On their Facebook page, the two have amassed quite a video library and are in the shine-making business in a big fancy way. Also on tonight's episode, Mark and Digger head down to Georgia and uncover Elvis, Popcorn Sutton's most prolific still. Meanwhile, Tim and Tickle are at loggerheads and confused on what to do with their new backwoods shine they have created. As we see in the clip, Mike plans and crafts some intense payback after discovering a rival's not kosher liquor sales are stealing his very own customers. A plan is hatched. Moonshiners exclusive. Breaking the shiner's code means Mike has a lighter at the Radian, the hills of Appalachia, where the dense forests roll like the belly of the earth. The craft of moonshining is as old as the mountain itself. Passed down through generations like a sacred secret, the moonshiner's code is a set of unwritten rules that governs everything from the recipes to the quiet, dangerous dance with law enforcement. The code is sacred. Breaking it can lead to everything from a ruined reputation to a loss of life. But Mike, a veteran moonshiner, had a different idea, one that involved a simple tool, a lighter. Mike had grown up in these hills, learning the trade from his father, who had learned it from his father. His family had never been rich, but they were proud and resilient, and they had a way of making the finest moonshine in the county. They called it Appalachian Gold, a mix of corn, sugar, and water that could only be described as liquid sunshine. For Mike, it was more than just a business. It was a calling. He was a craftsman, and the mountains whispered their secrets to him as he worked. He knew the land, the water, the temperature of the stills. He knew the moonshine code like the back of his hand. But the code was changing. Times were different now. The traditional methods were being replaced by modern shortcuts. New players had entered the game, cutting corners and breaking the sacred rules that kept the business alive. Mike watched with growing frustration as the younger generation took shortcuts, selling out to corporate distilleries, cutting corners with chemicals and cheap ingredients. They were taking the craft and turning it into a commodity. The code was no longer sacred to them, and it was starting to eat away at the soul of moonshining. Mike had been patient, but patience had worn thin. He couldn't sit idly by while the trade he loved was being tarnished. That's when he came up with the idea. Breaking the code had consequences, and it wasn't something he took lightly. But Mike had a plan that would shake the industry to its core and remind everyone that the craft was more than just making liquor, it was a way of life. The Moonshiners' Code was simple, yet intricate. It was more than just about the recipe or the process. It was a way of respecting the land, the tradition, and the people involved. The code dictated everything, from the ingredients to the distribution methods. Mike had learned it all from his father, who had learned it from his father before. Use the finest corn, sugar, and water. The quality of the ingredients was paramount. Cutting corners meant cutting quality. Respect the process. The stills were sacred. You didn't rush the process, no matter how tempting it was. The right temperature, the right timing, the perfect balance. It wasn't about speed. It was about quality. Never sell to the wrong people. The code was clear. Only sell to those who understood the craft, those who would appreciate the art. Selling to outsiders or law enforcement was a betrayal. Silence is golden. Never speak about the business to outsiders. Silence was essential to keeping the craft alive. No shortcuts. The moment you started cutting corners, you lost your soul. There were no shortcuts in moonshining. You had to do it right or not at all. Mike had followed this code his entire life. But the younger generation was making it harder and harder to follow. They didn't care about the process. They didn't care about the quality. They cared about the profit, and that was something Mike couldn't stand. The breaking point all came to a head one night when Mike received a tip that a new moonshiner had set up shop just over the ridge. The word was that they were cutting corners, using chemicals instead of proper fermentation, and selling their product at a fraction of the price that Mike's distillery could manage. The younger crowd was flocking to them, enticed by the cheap price and fast turnaround. It was the death knell for everything Mike believed in. Mike wasn't the kind of person to sit on his hands. He had seen the signs before, the subtle shift in the landscape of moonshining. It wasn't about making the best product anymore. It was about making the most money. The new breed of moonshiner wasn't just breaking the code, they were ripping it apart, piece by piece. But Mike wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. He had the skills, the knowledge, and the tools to show the world that the Moonshiners' Code still had meaning. It was time to remind everyone why quality mattered, why tradition mattered. But it wasn't just about making the best liquor, it was about something more. It was about keeping the spirit of the hills alive. The lighter's flame Mike didn't carry much on his person, but there was one item he always kept close. A weathered silver lighter that had been passed down from his father. It wasn't a fancy piece, but it was significant. The lighter symbolized his commitment to the code. It was his way of saying, "I will not break this." Mike's father had used that lighter to light the first batch of moonshine he ever made. Mike had used it the same way. It was more than just a tool, it was a mark of respect. One night, when Mike was alone in the still house, he took out the lighter and clicked it open. The small flame flickered in the dim light of the room, casting shadows on the walls. He held the lighter up to the first jar of moonshine he had ever made. The liquid was clear, almost glowing in the light. It had taken him weeks of perfecting the recipe, tweaking the process to get it just right. This was what moonshine was supposed to be. This was the real thing. Mike took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and then set the lighter down next to the jar. He was done waiting. He wasn't going to sit by and watch his heritage slip away. If it meant breaking the code, he would do it. He was going to light the way. The confrontation the next day. Mike gathered his tools and set out for the ridge where the new moonshiner had set up shop. He wasn't there to destroy the man's business. He was there to make a statement. Mike wasn't interested in violence or revenge. He wasn't that kind of person. But he knew that if he didn't act, the very soul of moonshining would be lost forever. When Mike arrived, he found the makeshift stills set up in a small, cluttered barn. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol and chemicals. It was clear that the new moonshiner wasn't following the code. Mike could see it in the equipment, in the hastily constructed stills that looked like they might explode at any moment. The young man, a skinny guy with wild hair and a nervous look, was standing over a batch of fermenting corn. He looked up in surprise as Mike stepped into the barn. "You the one they call Mike?" the young man asked, eyeing him warily. Mike nodded. "That's me. You got a problem with my business?" the moonshiner asked, his voice shaky. Mike didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the still, inspecting it closely. "This ain't right," he muttered, more to himself than to the young man. "What's wrong with it?" the moonshiner asked, growing defensive. "I'm making good money. This is a business." Mike shook his head. "You're not making moonshine. You're making poison. You're ruining something sacred, and that's something I can't let slide." The moonshiner laughed nervously. "It's just business, old man. People want cheap liquor. They don't care about your fancy tradition."